So we got a big F-350 here. It's got a brake line leak, and of course it's behind the fuel tank. So the first thing we'll do is drop this fuel tank. Thankfully, well, number one, it's a flatbed, so I can get to all the connections on top of the fuel tank pretty easily without even, without having to remove a bed or anything. And then the other thing is there's not much fuel in this thing, so we'll get the start on removing the fuel tank because the brake line, of course, is leaking right behind there. So we're just gonna cut that section out and use a double flare fitting to fix it. There's a lot of debate. Well, it really shouldn't be any debate. You should never use compression fittings on a brake line, but I know I see on the internet people debating about that. Always use a double flare when you're repairing a brake line like this. So I'll kind of go over that a little bit, but anyway, first thing we'll do is drop this tank down. Alright, so the first thing I do is remove the fill tube and the vent tube, take these off, and then we'll hit these fuel lines right here. But anyway, this is just held on by regular clamps, so we'll take these two off and pull those away from the tank. Alright, so I got the filler and the vent tube off, and took the little vacuum line off. Now I got pull these keepers off. I already pulled those off. You just pull these forward and then they pop out. And then you just get a set of these. I got this. It's a cheap set I bought off the tool truck probably 20 years ago. And I bought nicer sets since then, the aluminum ones and the nicer ones. And I still always go back to this set. I've had this set for probably 20, 25 years easy. And very cheap. Like I said, I got the tool truck real cheap. And I just use these. You just find the right size for the line. And you push this in, and that releases the spring on these lines. So that'll be the next thing we do. And then we got one vacuum line. Well, I guess we got the fuel gauge wiring harness we have to get off, and then these two lines, and then one vacuum line back there, and our evap line, and then this should be ready to come down theoretically. So we'll. Go ahead and take these off. Alright, so you just find the right tool, right size, and you stick this in first. So you just, it's split. So you just slide it up over the line, push that in until you can hear it engage, and then it just pulls right off. So there's a little spring in here that it engages. And you just slide that off, slide it onto the next one, push it in. This one might be a little bit bigger. Yeah, I'll have to go to the next size up on this one, but that's pretty much the gist of that on how to use these. Alright, so actually that line was the same size as the other one, same tool. Sometimes they want to fight you a little. A couple tricks with that is put the tool in and then rotate a couple, try to take it out, put it in, take it out, put it in a couple different, a couple different angles. Sometimes the spring will get stuck in there and it won't release. Or even try to rotate this a little, or push it in and then push it out. There's, once you do enough of these, there's little tricks you can do to get these loose. This was a little bit stubborn, but anyway, yeah, it was the same size as as the other one. So just a little bit stubborn. So now that's off. Now we'll fish out this wiring harness for the fuel gauge and disconnect that, and then this tank should be ready to drop. Got two straps on it, so we'll fish that wiring harness out next and drop this tank. Alright, you get to this point. Sometimes it's easier if you got a friend that can help you or whatever. Of course I work alone because that's how I roll. So I got this big transmission jack under here that I use sometimes for heavy trucks, like the box trucks and stuff I work on. So took that strap off, 13 millimeter, and there's one back here, 13 millimeter, and then we'll slowly lower this tank down. Like I said, this is if you got a full tank or half tank, you might want to consider draining some of the gas out before you do this. This has already got, if the fuel gauge is right, which we hope it is, you never know, then it doesn't have very much fuel in it to begin with. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop with this big transmission jack. This tank's pretty large. I mean, it goes from there all the way up to there. So it's not very wide though. So anyway, this would definitely be easier if you have another person, but if you don't and you're a man like me, you just get it done. You don't sit around and cry or call people. You just take care of business. So that's what we're going to do on this tank here. Drop the other strap, and then we'll lower this thing down. All right, so you can see here I got the tank dropped out. I'm actually not going to take it down all the way because there's really no reason to. I can get to the line now. I already started pulling out of the. I already started pulling the lines out of the retainers. I got one more retainer over on this side. They're little plastic retainers. And anyway, we'll get that off, and then I'll take it loose from the line back here, and then we'll cut it off somewhere up there where it's still nice and not rusty. And we'll put a double flare fitting in and replace that line. So anyway, it's not worth it dropping the tank completely down, especially by myself. I could do it, but it's up against the dry shaft now. It's pretty secure right there. It's not going anywhere. Everything's disconnected from it on the top. And anyway, so we're going to get that retainer off on this side and take the fitting off to the rubber line, and then we'll be able to pull it out a little bit and see where we're going to cut it at and go get some line and replace this thing. Get it back on the road. All right, so this is inside the frame here. Here's the line. I got it pulled away from the frame. And the line actually looks like it's pretty good when it gets up to there. So we'll be able to cut this somewhere. I'll probably cut it a little bit farther up. And this goes all the way back up to your rubber line right here. So we're going to take this fitting out, and then we'll, like I said, we'll cut it back there where it's good still and replace this line. And it's held on. I don't know if I can get the camera in there. Probably not. There's little plastic retainers. There's like 3 or 4 of them. And you just pop them out. They're not real hard to get loose. So anyway, we will take that fitting off with the rubber and then cut it back here, and then we'll go get some line and replace this bad boy. And hopefully we'll be able to open up all the bleeders on the caliper so that we can bleed the system out after we're done. So anyway, get to work. Alright, so here it is out of the truck. It's a little over 8 feet long, so may have to put 2 sections in. I'm not sure yet on what they have available. Now the end that goes to your rubber line is 11mm flare. You always want to use the right wrench. I mean, on this it doesn't really matter if we're replacing it, but it's good to get in the habit of using the right wrench. So you want to use a flare wrench to get this loose. 11mm. And then came back here and I cut it. There's not much rust on this. This is barely any surface rust. So I cut it back where the line is good. So I don't know if they're going to have that much line in one piece. I may have to put 2 sections in, but we're hoping that maybe we'll get lucky on it. You can see right here. This is the area it was leaking in. I haven't buffed it off yet to see if where the hole's at, but it's real rusty back here, and it was leaking somewhere in this area. So, and there's no sense, you can't just cut a little because it's all rusty all the way back. So there's no point in just fixing just this area. So anyway, we'll get the parts and we'll get this thing going. So I went ahead and put in the buffer wheel, and you can see right here, there's the hole. Pretty small, but it's enough. Alright, so we're using copper line. It has a higher PSI rating than steel, and it's easier to work with. It costs a little more than steel, but you can get, sometimes you get good deals online for it. This is a 25-foot roll. Anyway, this is what we're going to use. We're going to double flare this. I got the other line laid out, so we'll just lay this alongside of it and shape it pretty close to where it's supposed to be, and then we'll flare it out and flare the other line out that's still on the truck and hook it all up. So anyway, Like I said, this is a little bit more expensive. It's more expensive than the steel line, but it's much easier to work with, and it has a higher PSI rating. So that's why I've been started using this copper stuff. And it doesn't have that coating on either that the steel has, and I don't like that coating. It seems like the steel lines crack easier. That coating, it's just, I don't know. This is a much nicer setup. So anyway, I'll get to laying that out and forming it a little bit. All right, as you can see here, I got this laid out. I got it bent pretty close to how the factory had it bent. This stuff, that's another reason why I like copper. You can bend this by hand. I mean, I bend steel by hand too, usually, mostly. Unless it's a real intricate bend or something. You know, if you're a man, you can bend steel by hand. But actually gotten pretty good at it over the years. But this copper stuff is really easy to bend, you know, by hand. So it's very easy to work with. And what I do normally is start at one end and work my way back. Now I let this a little bit longer. This end a little bit longer. This is the end that's going to the front of the truck. I do that on purpose so that I can get this laid in there, and then I can just trim off whatever I need. But I always like to put a little extra on this end just in case a bend's not perfect or something like that. I can readjust it as I put it in. So I'm gonna flare these two ends out. You know, you use a double flare. Don't use a compression flare. I'm not gonna show that because I don't have anyone to hold the camera, and I'm kind of in a hurry. So there's a lot of videos online about how to double flare. But on automotive, you always want a double flare. Brake lines anyway. Fuel lines and stuff, you can kind of get away with different types of fittings, but on these we want to do double flare fittings. So anyway, I'm going to flare these out, and then we'll put this in the truck, and then I'll put a union in it and kind of show you all that. All right, don't forget to put your your fitting on before you double flare. It should look like this once you're done. Nice double flare. So I'm not going to do that in yet because I may have to trim some off of it. So we'll hook this up to the brake line in the back, and then route this line, and then we'll join those two where I cut it under the cab. So anyway, this is what your double flare should look like when you're done. Alright, so it's back in on the brake line. And if you did all your bends right, if you can see in there, here's my line right here. It should go back into your factory hold points if you did your bends right. And of course, this is back. I made all my bends right. So anyway, it's all back into the factory. So we'll just go to the front and we'll flare those two ends out and put a union in there. And then this brake line will be done. We'll put the gas tank back up, and I don't know, this is some kind of line, electrical line here. I'm not sure what that goes to, but anyway, we'll put the gas tank back up, and then we'll bleed it out, and it should be good. So next thing we'll do is join those two ends. I'll probably have to trim that one copper line down a little bit and join them up. So as you can see here, I'm getting ready to join these two. Now you want to make sure you put your nuts on before you cut and flare. You don't want to forget to do that, because once you flare it, you won't be able to get this nut on. And you want to have it pointing the right direction, going towards the union. So I'm going to slide this on and then slide it back. And you can see here, I capped this line. This is the factory line, because you don't want your master cylinder going dry if you can help it. Just makes the bleeding process easier if it doesn't go dry. So I had this capped off. There's no pressure on it. Of course, you never want to hit your brakes when you have this line off, or any lines off, because then you're just going to blow all your brake fluid right out of there. So this will be your one of the most crucial cuts right here, because you don't want this too short or too long. So you want to really make sure you cut off what you need on this without cutting it too short or too long. So anyway, I'll put a nut on this one and slide it, and then I'll flare it, and then use this to join the two together. It's a 1/4 inch union. This is all 1/4 inch brake line on these Fords. This is an F-350, so I think most common is 3/16 brake line, but these use 1/4 inch. So anyway, I'll get to cutting this, and then we'll flare these two and join them together, and she'll have rear brakes again. Alright, so we got the union in. These are flared out, and you can see the lines back in the factory, the factory hold downs. So if you bend your lines right, they should all go right back into where they're supposed to go. So now we'll just pump on the brakes, make sure we don't have any leaks, and then we'll put this fuel tank up, and then we'll start the bleed process. Alright, so how I check for leaks, I make sure the master cylinder is full to the max, and then I slam on the brakes pretty hard. Not slam, I press down real hard on the brakes several times with the engine off, not driving it or anything. And just really put some force into the brake pedal and make sure none of the fittings are leaking. And anyway, I did that and there was no leaks, so we'll work on getting this fuel tank back up and getting this thing buttoned up. Alright, so I got the gas tank back up there. There's nothing really scientific about it. You just jack it up. Make sure it's lined up under here, pretty close to where it's supposed to be. You just jack it up and then put those two bolts back in the straps. So I'm just going to go ahead and hook up everything I took off up here. On these fuel lines that you use, they just push them in and they click on. And then you just put this retainer back on. It was pretty easy. And then it's just a couple hose clamps and a few evap lines, and it's back together. So then, anyway, I'm going to do that, and then we'll go about bleeding this thing. I triple check there's no leaks again. I again got in there and pumped on it real hard and checked my connections again. There's no leaks, so the pedal actually feels pretty good without even bleeding it. So and I don't think this master cylinder went dry completely, which is always good. When you lose your brake line like that, it's better just to stop driving it right away, and because sometimes it's a real pain to get the master cylinder and everything bled out if you bleed all the way dry, or if you let it go all the way dry. Anyway, we're gonna hook these rest of these lines up, and then we'll bleed it out and take it for a little ride. All right, so when you bleed it, just stick. If you don't have, I use air compressor to suck the bubbles out. You just hook your line to it, to your fitting, loosen it, and hit your button, and it'll suck all the air bubbles out. You can see there, most of them are already gone. So you just do that for a little bit, then close that up, and then you just go down to each wheel and do the same thing, and then you should have a really good pedal after that. These things are, there's different ones available. This one's got a Harbor Freight. They're not that expensive and they work really well. You don't have to have somebody help you bleed the brakes out with it. Alright, so you just do that to all four wheels and your brakes are bled, and then it's ready to go. So the brakes are good on this. And the other thing, stupid Ford buzzers. He wants this fixed, so I'll have to go to the junkyard and get that shifter. Looks similar to that Explorer we did the other day. So anyway, we'll get that done, and then we'll get this Hoopty back on the road.